Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first of three breakout sessions in our China competition track at this year's XM annual conference. I'm Chris Van Ness. I'm our Senior Vice President for Communications and External Engagement. I am joined by my colleague, Adam Frost, who heads our China and Transformational Exports program. Following my interview with Adam today, we will have time at the end for audience Q&A. So if you stick on until the end, we'll make sure to get to some questions from you all. With that housekeeping out of the way, Adam, it is a pleasure to be here with you today and a pleasure to be at our annual conference.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I would love to start with just kind of a primer on CTEP. I believe that most of our audience is probably familiar with when and how CTEP started, but let's perhaps start with a recap. So I think my question for you as a starter is, can you tell us about the CTEP program's history?
Absolutely, Chris, and thank you so much for having me here today. And I really do want to thank the audience for dialing in to listen to this today. It's really important to us. So my thanks to everyone for listening up. So for those of you who are new to CTEP, I do hope that this session is going to answer most of your questions about this exciting new program we have here at XM. But we only have an hour to get through this, and so I'm going to go relatively quickly and to ensure we have enough time for the Q&A that Chris mentioned just a moment ago. Now, at the end of this, if you still have unanswered questions, please do visit our recently refreshed website, where we will hopefully have answers to your remaining questions. You can reach the CTEP website by visiting www.exim.gov/CTEP, www.exim.gov/CTEP. And if you still can't find the answers to all your questions there, please do reach out to me or my colleagues in the program at ctep@exim.gov. All right, so Chris, to your question regarding the origins of CTEP, the quickest and simplest way to answer that is that Congress mandated the creation of CTEP as part of XM's historic 7-year reauthorization in December of 2019, so as to better serve U.S. exporters facing competition from the People's Republic of China-backed financing. Now that, however, doesn't get into the important context within which CTEP was stood up. So as President Biden said in April this year, quote, "We are in a competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century." Now at XM, we know that it's American workers and your companies that are the ones that will decide this competition. And we believe exports are a crucial tool that are going to help you win. But when the field is at level, you just can't do it alone. Because when we look at the broader competition, you cannot fail to notice that the People's Republic of China has fundamentally changed the export credit landscape. Now, I'm sure your audience is aware, but China finances projects oftentimes with financial terms and conditions that may be more favorable than what the U.S. or other Western countries can typically offer, and sometimes with misleading financing that pushes developing countries into greater and greater indebtedness. Now, due to China's aggressive financing, U.S. companies have been repeatedly blocked out of creditworthy deals in foreign markets. A particular concern for us also has been that China's focus on supporting the rollout of its technology companies, something that has both economic and national security implications for us here in the United States. So, to address these significant issues, Congress, as part of its 2019 reauthorization of XM, established CTEP. The legislative mandate, coupled with the December 2020 changes that XM's board made to its content policy, provide the flexibility that XM needs to ensure that the U.S. maintains its position as a global leader in cutting-edge technology, that U.S. exports remain competitive around the world, and most importantly, that foreign buyer decisions are based on the quality of the goods and services rather than the financing that supports the transaction. Because when it comes to the quality of the goods and services, frankly, no other country can match the U.S.
Well, why don't we start? You'd mentioned the legislative mandate that Congress provided XM. Why don't we start there? So, as a follow-up question, I think a lot of folks in the audience would be, I think, curious to dive a little bit deeper into what that legislative mandate meant. What did Congress ask XM to do? Tell us about what they asked XM, the program that they asked XM to stand up.
Absolutely, Chris. That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. So XM has always sought to support U.S. exporters using all the tools and authorities at our disposal. Now, while XM's mission, it really can be boiled down to the one great line, support U.S. jobs through the facilitation of U.S. exports. When you think about it, that mission is actually pretty broad because it means XM has to be positioned to support exporters of all sizes and from all industries. Now, when establishing CTEP, Congress did not necessarily give XM any new powers per se, right? Rather, Congress mandated that XM dedicate staff solely to supporting U.S. exporters facing PRC-backed competition and folks exporting in the transformational export areas. So in practice, this means that me and my team are here to work with the U.S. export community to identify what is the necessary level of support to level the playing field and to make sure that U.S. companies can win the deal based on the quality of the goods and services rather than the financing that underpins the transaction. So to quote Congress directly, right, CTEP was created to support the extension of loans, guarantees, and insurance at rates and on terms and other conditions, to the extent practicable, that are fully competitive with those established by the People's Republic of China. And Congress gave us a two-part mandate. So this could be a little confusing, Chris. There's a two-parter to this. In part one, in any industry that may be facing PRC competition, EXIM has the ability to think about offering competitive rates, terms, and conditions to help level the playing field for the U.S. exporter. But the second part of that mandate is to advance U.S. comparative leadership with respect to the People's Republic or support U.S. innovation, employment, and technology standards in 10 transformational export areas.
So why don't we stick on that last point on the transformational export areas? Then we'll come back to the China piece. Can you tell our audience about the 10 transformational export areas? What are they? Help us understand what that means.
Absolutely, Chris. So now you're getting into the rub of these things. So before I list out the 10 transformational exports and describe a few for you, I do want to take a step back to highlight that when it comes to the part two of that two-part mandate I was mentioning before, Congress's charge to EXIM is to advance the comparative leadership of the United States through direct exports. Now, Congress did not use the phrase transformational export industries, transformational export sectors, transformational export products. Our elected representatives asked EXIM to help advance the comparative leadership of the U.S. through exports in the transformational export areas. So why is that important? Our assessment here at EXIM is that the comparative advantage in these areas can only come from a vibrant and healthy commercial ecosystem at all stages of value creation. So with that context, I want our listeners to understand that EXIM is focused on the full supply chain of the transformational export areas. All right, so what does that mean? What that means is that your export may qualify as transformational if it meets either criteria in what we call our two-part test. So part one is the primary value, whether the primary value of your export largely consists of equipment or services that meet EXIM's definition for the transformational export area. Or part two, the foreign buyer will use your export to meet the same purpose of that definition. So for example, an export of solar panels counts as a transformational export because its primary value consists of equipment used to generate electricity from a renewable source, or like I talk to my kids, the sun. As another example, an export of equipment, let's say power transmission lines, could count as a transformational export if the foreign buyer is going to use your product in a renewable energy project. So why is that? Because the U.S. cannot achieve comparative advantage in renewable energy without all the buyer-seller relationships that converge to make renewable energy possible and profitable. Now, I'll take a moment. You'll see 10 transformational exports are going to pop up on the screen. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to read off a slide to everyone live, but I do recommend, again, you visit our website at www.exim.gov/CTEP to learn a little bit more and get a little bit more information. Now, please note, these 10 transformational export areas were congressionally defined, right? And they do include all related services related to them.
Thanks, Adam. With that primer on the transformational export areas in our rearview mirror, with that understanding, I do want to turn to the piece of your program, the other half of the house, the China piece. I'd be curious to know what can you and your staff do for exporters that view themselves as experiencing competition from China?
That's a great question. Great question, Chris. We're incredibly passionate about this topic. So look, in these situations, Congress mandated that EXIM find ways to extend rates terms and conditions that directly neutralize the financial support for competing goods and services financed by the PRC. So EXIM has the authority to adjust all aspects of its financing package, but I want to make clear that we're only going to adjust those aspects that make it necessary for the U.S. exporter to remain competitive. So let me give you for example. So EXIM may not need to adjust the interest rate to make a U.S. export competitive. It may be sufficient simply to extend the tenor of the loan. Because it's important to note that this isn't a race to the bottom. Exports that qualify under the Chinese competition are subject to the traditional EXIM rules for the amount of financing available.
Well, that's good to know. I'd be curious to follow on to that question. As exporters are kind of trying to figure out, do they qualify, do they not qualify? What do importers do? How do they go about demonstrating Chinese competition?
So demonstrating the Chinese competition. A U.S. exporter can demonstrate that Chinese competition in a number of different ways, right? I mean, look, in the ideal case, we'd love to see evidence that our PRC-backed competitor's financing package to the foreign buyer makes the U.S. offer uncompetitive, right? So we'd love to see the specifics of the financing. But we know that that's a tall order, right? And as you'll hear in the China Track conversation tomorrow, the People's Republic is notoriously opaque in how it does business. So we cannot place that burden entirely on you, the U.S. exporter, right? We recognize that in some cases, only circumstantial evidence may be available, such as a foreign buyer telling you that your offer is just not competitive because he or she has received a better offer, or this historical evidence from repeated efforts in a foreign industry or foreign market. But ultimately, please know, the goal of our program is not to create an undue burden on the exporter, but to balance the need for information with the goal of leveling the playing field for the U.S. exporter overseas. And remember, we are a government agency. We routinely work with other departments and agencies across the USG to gather additional information that may help us understand and demonstrate that you're facing PRC-backed competition.
Okay. You've given us a pretty good understanding of what you can do and what exporters need to understand about the China competition piece of your mandate. Can you tell us more? I know you had named the 10 transformational export areas. Can you tell us more about the benefits for transformational exports? How are they different from benefits under the China competition mandate?
That's a great question, Chris. So the congressional mandate, coupled with changes that EXIM board made to its content policies in December of 2020, do allow EXIM to offer flexible rates, terms, and conditions and offer full EXIM financing support when an export meets the content threshold specifically designed for the transformational export areas. So under transformational export financing, EXIM support is proportional, under traditional financing, I should say, EXIM support is proportional to the level of U.S. content, but may not exceed 85%, just like it would be for the China competition portion of the program. But for a transformational export program, eligible transaction, any U.S. exporter that has at least 51% U.S. content, EXIM can finance up to 85% of the eligible goods and services. Now, and for transformational exports only, we can consider transactions with less than 51% U.S. content, provided that there's substantial financing up to 85%, provided that the exporter meets sort of two conditions, right? So the first condition is that the exporter provides an actionable jobs plan that shows how this transaction is going to help increase U.S.-based employment in the next 3 to 5 years. And as an example, right, this could include descriptions of the quality of new hires, of the quantity of new hires made possible by the transaction, or plausible plans to shift sourcing and or relocate supply chains from the offshore to the United States, right? Or maybe even plausible plans to move away from a proposed effort to offshore plans or offshore procurement. Plans for investment in new U.S.-based facilities would also be something we take into consideration. Now for part 2, I'll actually ask them to pull up another slide for you. The exporter has to help meet one of 7 additional factors. Now, for those who are familiar, these are going to look a lot like the Department of Commerce's Advocacy Center factors, things they look at to try to understand the value and why to support a U.S. exporter. Because remember, EXIM's mission is to support U.S. jobs, so you can boil these 2 conditions really down to 2 points. The less content that you have in your export, the more EXIM needs your help to understand why EXIM financing helps grow U.S. jobs.
Okay, as fundamentally our mission drives back to creating and supporting U.S. jobs.
Absolutely.
All right. I guess as a follow-on question, I'd ask, does this mean that companies can reduce the amount of U.S. content to their exports from 85% to 51% or even less?
Yeah, this is a really, really important question, Chris, and I want to make sure the audience understands that the intent of CTEP is to support transformational exports, not to reduce the amount of U.S. content in a transformational export area. Now, what that means is that when the EXIM board approved the tailored content policy for the transformational exports, it recognized that the complex globally integrated supply chains make it more difficult for exports to meet sort of the traditional EXIM content requirements of the 10 transformational export areas. So for these sort of areas, an exporter who purposefully reconfigures their supply chain to minimize the level of U.S. content would be acting contrary to the intent of EXIM's board and what Congress laid out for us. What I'm saying is if you intentionally try to get there, obviously we can't help you.
So Adam, how much money is EXIM putting towards the CTEP program?
Well, Chris, this is what we're excited about, and I'll answer that question sort of in 2 ways. So
Okay.
The first is I think it's important for you to know that my office isn't doing this job alone, right? EXIM is a team of over 400 highly dedicated civil servants, and this program is part of a larger team. So we still need to grow, and I want you to know that XM has fully dedicated full-time personnel towards this important effort. We're resourced and ready to compete. However, let me argue that Congress has challenged us to reserve not less than 20% of our lending capacity for this specific program. What that means is about $27 billion is available to support U.S. exporters and help you compete and level the playing field for you. So for the exporters listening today facing China competition, or those of you that think you may qualify as a transformational export, there's a substantial amount of support for you, and we're ready to work with you.
So Adam, I know that CTEP is new in comparison to XM as an agency. So I'm wondering if you can share any success stories that you and the team have developed thus far.
Absolutely, Chris. You know, we're very proud of everything we're doing here, and XM is very proud of all the activity that's been going on the last 2 years, but you guys don't want to hear it from me. Right, this new mandate has helped a number of U.S. exporters win or maintain their own transactions over stiff competition from PRC-backed competitors. So rather than listen to me tell stories and talk about this program all day on, I asked our colleagues at a company called Weldey Lamont to speak about a recent transaction of theirs in Senegal, where XM was able to support them in the face of stiff competition from the PRC. It's a great success story, and they're a great American company.
Hello, my name is Pat Henley. I'm president of Weldey Lamont Associates in Chicago, along with Papa Sal, my country manager for Senegal. We want to tell you a little bit of our story and how we've benefited from XM Bank. A little background on Weldey Lamont. We're a small company out of Chicago. We were formed in 1946. Originally, we were in the business of working with customers who needed electrical power equipment solutions. So that's how we started in 1946. It evolved over the years to go from just providing electrical equipment and specifications to people in the Midwest. We eventually started doing work in China, Taiwan, Yemen, and across the globe. And then around 1994, I was approached by a young man out of Southern Illinois, this in the Chicago area. He was born in Ghana, came to the US to go to college. Then he stayed in Chicago, and eventually he was requested by somebody back in Ghana to help source an American-made supplier for electrical equipment. That's how we came into the picture. We started doing work there in 1997. And since 1997, we've done approximately $380 million worth of rural electrification work, all financed through the U.S. Export-Import Bank. If it wasn't for that, we would have never been able to do the job. Of the money that I mentioned $380 million, we've energized approximately 2,500 villages, which encompasses maybe 2 million people, all now benefiting from electricity that we take for granted in the US, and over there it's very much a luxury. In 2013, Weldey Lamont, we'd only been focusing in Ghana, so I wanted to expand. So Papa Sal, to my right, he was with the local utility company here in Chicago, came to us, we talked, and in 2013, hired Papa on to expand our opportunities in Senegal. And that was his job, is to go out and chase and find this work. So with that, I want to hand it off to Papa. You relay the story of how you found our project, what it involved, who you had to deal with.
Thank you, Pat. Based on our knowledge of the terrain and our expertise in rural electrification in Africa, we crafted a financial and technical bidding package that could help the Republic of Senegal in its quest for universal access to electricity by the year 2025. Our first proposal was based on standard US Exim Bank long-term direct loan terms, namely 85% with a 10-year repayment period. Under these rules, Senegal would be required to come up with a 15% cash down payment. These were the same terms we used under our previous Ghana contracts. Our first feedback from the Senegalese was that our financing terms were not as competitive as financing from non-OECD lenders. If we wanted to be even considered as potential bidders, we would need to provide 100% financing and a longer term loan. And this was a global tender that included companies from Europe, from China, and consequently, it was critical that Wadi Laman to be able to match the terms offered by a Chinese-backed company or a Chinese-backed bidder. Out of eight companies, Wadi Laman made it to the final. I would say to the short list of 5 during the technical review, and then eventually after financial review, we made it to the final 2, along with a Chinese-backed company. So the competition was very tough and lasted a very long time, as Chinese were trying to do everything they could to win the bid. And they are still trying to this very day, even after the contract got awarded to Wadi Laman. Providing 100% financing wasn't that difficult. For all we had to do was to arrange 15%, to arrange a 15% down payment loan, like what we did for a Ghana project back in 1997. Getting a longer term, a longer period, repayment period was going to be challenging. We needed to talk to our bankers. Exim was contacted along with JP Morgan, which is our commercial bank. Our original offering included a 10-year tenor on grid equipment and 12-year on solar equipment. After many discussions with our loan officers at Exim Bank, we were told that under Exim's new China and transformational exports program, we would be able to present 18-year term financing on the whole project. Without the 18-year term, our bid wouldn't have been acceptable. To compound the challenges that a longer term presented, Senegal also wanted a euro-based loan rather than the US dollar. Because Exim will only provide loan based on US dollar, JP Morgan Chase role was elevated to the lead arranger, with Exim guaranteeing the loan. So to help our negotiation in Senegal, we enlisted the help of the US Embassy, the US TDA, and the Department of Commerce. And with the help of the US Embassy and US TDA, we were successful in securing a training grant to train utility engineers from Senegal on US equipment and installation techniques. This grant and the longer tenure of the loan were very instrumental in helping us secure the contract.
Without the help of the US government's Commerce, US TDA, China Transformational Export, the guys at Exim, we have never been able to do this project. Been at this, I said, since 1997, and for the longest time, it was just technical and finance and construction. And this whole one has turned us both into diplomats. We wound up doing more and more intergovernmental talking than we've ever had planned on. And so in the end, I do really want to thank everybody at Exim and everybody within the US government for helping us out. Without it, we would never gone anywhere.
Hey, thank you, Wadi Laman team, for that fantastic presentation. It was a pleasure working with you all. And to our audience, I really hope you found that example informative. So now, if you could, I'd like to turn it over to Q&A for the audience today, where I'll be online ready to answer any questions you may have for this program, Chris.
Sounds good. Thanks everybody for being here. Adam, thanks for your time, and look forward to audience questions.
It was a pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.